Well, let's talk more about people going through fertility treatment and why is it important for them to work with a mental health professional?
So I think there's kind of two sides to it, right? We see people who really need the education, particularly if you're using what call third-party reproduction, using an egg donor, sperm donor, gestational carrier to have your family, and certainly also to be able to have counseling and support for any type of fertility treatment. As we know, fertility treatment is enormously stressful and the number one reason why patients drop out of treatment. And we really want to make sure that their stress levels are low enough so they can withstand treatment and get to their dreams.
Welcome to the Egg Whisperer Show. I am so delighted to have Lisa Schuman on today. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
For our listeners and viewers, I'd love to share a little bit more about Lisa. Lisa Schuman, LCSW, is a leading therapist, award-winning researcher, author, and podcast host in the field of family building, donor conception, and surrogacy. With decades of experience and a personal journey through various paths to parenthood, she founded the Center for Family Building and recently created the only expert-guided community platform designed for parents and parents-to-be using reproductive medicine to build their families. Through the new membership, the Building Your Family community, Lisa provides unique strategies to help make your path to parenthood smoother and more informed, empowering you to navigate the critical decisions that shape your family's future. Lisa, welcome again.
Well, that's a wonderful and beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. I know you've already had a busy day in the office and lots of patients, so I appreciate you seeing me today.
Lisa, share with us a bit of your background and what led you to specialize in family building and fertility counseling.
So maybe close to 30 years ago, my kids are older now, I started my fertility journey myself, and my fertility doctor at the time thought that I might be interested in it. So I went to the trainings at the time for the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, and I really fell in love with it. And I've been working in this field ever since. And it's, as you know, wonderful and ever changing. And I'm so glad to be able to help as many people as I can.
Tell us about the Center for Family Building.
So I started this community years and years ago. I had my private practice and I worked in-house at many fertility clinics as well, but always kept my group private practice going because, again, I wanted to support as many people as possible. And through the Center for Family Building, I've been able to work with a lot of different programs around the country. I have therapists around the country in every state to do gestational carrier screenings, donor egg screenings, or also recipient consultations, IP consultations, intended parent consultation, and everything that people need. And so it's there as a resource for everyone. And now we've just added on 3 lived expert consultants. I call them lived expert consultants because I think it can be a little confusing when you put coaches on there and it's undefined, I guess, what you're getting. And these people are really just talking about their experiences. So there's social media people who like to share their stories, and so we've added them also for people who want to access that as well.
That's great. I think talking to someone who's been through it can be so helpful for patients, especially when so alone. I want you to tell us about your book and how it also supports patients. You're doing so much to support this community.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so I wrote this book. It was an itch that I needed to scratch because when you see something over and over again, you start to think, wow, why don't I put this out there in a bigger way? Because I'm saying it over and over again 1,000 times a day. And then people say, wow, that's such a great idea. Nobody's ever told me that before. How did you think of that? And so I just decided to put all of those learning into one book. It's called Building Your Family, The Complete Guide to Donor Conception. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, anywhere books are sold. But you can also find it on Audible. If you're like me, you might want to do it while you're exercising, consume information while you're doing the dishes or something like that. If you're one of those people, you can listen on Audible as well.
Okay. Well, let's talk more about people going through fertility treatment and why is it important for them to work with a mental health professional, whether it's surrogacy, adoption, or doing IVF?
So I think there's kind of two sides to it, right? We see people who really need the education around their particular journeys, particularly if you're using what call third-party reproduction, using an egg donor, sperm donor, gestational carrier to have your family. And some people get worried that it's discriminatory, and it's not. It's really not discriminating against single people, queer couples, or heterosexual couples. It's for anyone who is going through this journey and needs education about the process, about how to think about the process, how to understand the relationship with a surrogate, how to choose a donor, all those things, and also how to handle your communication with your children about these issues. And so it's very important to have that education if you're going through those procedures. And certainly also to be able to have counseling and support for any type of fertility treatment. As we know, fertility treatment is enormously stressful and the number one reason why patients drop out of treatment, which is really sad to think about because there's so many other things that are difficult, right? People have trouble paying for it. People have trouble inconveniencing their lives. They have trouble in their relationships. There's so many other things that they have to deal with. But just because it's so stressful, that could be enough for them to leave treatment. And we really want to make sure that their stress levels are low enough so they can withstand treatment and get to their dreams.
Yeah, I want everyone to meet with a fertility therapist at the start of their journey. So I'm glad you talk about that too. And you also work extensively diverse family structures, including LGBTQIA plus and single parent families. What unique support do you offer to ensure that all families are seen and supported?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I think our world, as you probably see too, is changing. And we are no longer living in a world where everyone just has a mother and father and two children and a white picket fence. We have all kinds of families. And I was director of mental health services for a group called Gay Parents to Be for about a decade and saw a lot of families who now we see much more commonly. And that can be someone who is maybe using a friend as a donor. Maybe there's a gay couple using another gay couple as their donor, and maybe they're going to be aunts or uncles. Or maybe there are people who are both interested in co parenting together, and maybe they're not in a relationship. And so we're seeing so many different types of ways to build a family. And it's not just about genetic, it's not just about marriage. It's about really wanting to create a family and raise a beautiful child. And so we really need to think about this in a different way now. And it's so important. And I think that also informs the way we're thinking about donor conception in particular, because we really need to start to think about the families that are built and the children that come from these arrangements and how what we do is going to impact them. And very often we get into these relationships and think, oh, well, my best friend from college is going to be a sperm donor for me and we love him and he's great and that's wonderful, but we're going to call him dad. Well, maybe he is going to be a dad figure, but maybe he's not. And if he's not going to be at the parent teacher conferences and at the baseball games and all of that, if he's just going to be around for the birthday parties, then is he really being a dad and is it confusing for the child? So I really think the education up front is so helpful to kind of think through these things, particularly in these collaborative family building relationships.
And I imagine you play a huge role in your patients' lives when it comes to choosing a donor. I'd love for you to share with us some of the steps to choosing a donor when you're talking to your clients and patients.
As you know, in my book, I have a 5-step process. In my program on my platform, I call it something different, but it's basically the same. And I also talk about nutritional aspects of growing the child in your body and the epigenetic process. But basically, the reason why I think this is helpful, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot, is that even though patients say, I've already accepted that I need to use a donor, or maybe we're a gay couple, and so of course this is going to be obvious to everyone, it's not a problem. Or I'm a single mom to be, and I want to use a sperm donor, and I'm okay with it. It is very anxiety provoking to use the genetics of somebody outside of your family to build your own personal family, to develop this very intimate relationship that you're going to have with your child. And I think for most people, even without knowing it, they feel anxious, they feel nervous, and it really feels very disconcerting to feel like I'm going to choose somebody from this Match.com sort of website, and that is going to help me have the most important relationships in my life. And so I think as a reflex, people will naturally gravitate to what makes them comfortable. And people don't realize what's making them comfortable is something that's familiar to them. So some people feel comfortable if everybody has curly hair, like in their family, or everybody is Italian, like in their family, or maybe they really love that their parents were musical or athletic. And they have these things that are close to their hearts. And so they see this donor and they connect with her values or her voice, or maybe his athleticism or his height. And those are all lovely things. But in the end, those are things that we have very little control over, right? We look at the two princes of England, they don't look alike. We don't always look like our siblings or our parents. You look at Chrissy Brinkley and her daughter, they look nothing alike, right? So we can't control those things, and yet we still do that. And I see, and I'm sure you see that too, all of these people come in to use donor conception and they're very bright and they know these things, and yet it's very hard to resist that impulse to choose somebody that you like. And I'm not saying you shouldn't like your donor. It's nice to like your donor. It's good to feel good about your donor. You want someone who you feel good about to be this person who you're going to represent to your child, but you're really not going to be able to choose that person. You're choosing the genetics of that person and their families. So, what I've created is this 5-step process. So, it both helps people sort through these issues and choose ideas that will be helpful to them and their child, but also helps them sort through this big sea of possibilities. So I think the first step is easy. You can look for psychological screening. And according to the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, we should have both a psychological interview and a psychological test, either the PAI or the MMPI. Years ago, some sperm banks used psychological profiles that weren't unfortunately worth a hill of beans. And so they weren't really helpful. So we really need to use the right methods because we need to screen for psychopathology, but there's also 2 indicators for deception. There's an overt and covert lying scale. So if the donor is trying to be somebody he's not, or he's trying to hide aspects of himself that he doesn't want us to see, then we would see that on the test, and hopefully we'll throw it out altogether if there's something that we're concerned about, because he could be lying about his medical information or something like that. And so now we can narrow our search a little bit. If that donor's not screened psychologically, then we know that that's probably not a good choice. And we've seen lots of terrible stories of people who've developed schizophrenia and other sorts of psychological problems, which often don't come out until your 20s. And so we really need to make sure that that's there. Then the next step would be replicated risk. So, of course, the recipients typically go to see a genetic counselor and they talk to the genetic counselor and they think, okay, this is great. If I'm a carrier for something and the donor is a carrier for the same thing, I don't want to combine those two problems, right? I don't want to increase the possibility of my child developing that problem. And then they say, okay, I'm good to go. I never have to talk to the genetic counselor again. I'm fine. But the truth is, we can dig a little bit deeper. And I just spoke to a woman the other day who loved her donor, and yet she has colon cancer in her family. And the donor's grandfather died of colon cancer, and it's all along the grandfather's line. So I understand she likes this guy, but couldn't she choose somebody else who died of something else, right? We all die of something. So maybe the other donor's grandfather died of heart disease instead of colon cancer. That might be a better choice because you're not replicating those problems. So we can look at the family tree to the extent that we're able to and see what sorts of replicated problems there are.
I had a patient who she had alcoholism in her family. The donor had alcoholism. So she felt like, oh, that's a good choice because I also have alcoholism in the family and I'm okay. That's not a big deal. So your point is very well taken. I shared with her, well, I didn't use that term, but now I know to use it, replicated risk. And I shared with her that perhaps she shouldn't use someone that also has alcoholism in the family because it's so prevalent in hers. That's a very good point. Yeah. So take us to the third step.
So the next is undesirable characteristics. So this is kind of going from more severe to less severe. So we don't want to replicate undesirable characteristics either. And yes, they're not as important as life-threatening issues, but maybe you feel like everybody in your family has worn glasses for decades and you don't like that. And so maybe you want your donor's family to have good eyesight. Maybe there's asthma or diabetes or propensity for other issues in that donor's family that is also in your family. And maybe it's not colon cancer, but it's something that you would prefer not to have. Then after that, I would look at what we used to call open versus closed donors. Then it was changed to directed versus non-directed. I also feel that it's helpful to kind of think of known and open differently because you might have a donor who now is willing to be open or somebody who's your sister or brother. So these sorts of decisions are very complicated, and now we don't really have the option of saying closed because it doesn't really exist, which is a good thing, and we need to inform people about that. But I think the degree of openness is comfortable for different people at different times of their lives, and different sorts of situations mandates different sorts of decisions, right? If you come from a certain family where you feel like it's going to be very, very difficult to be connecting with the donor right away, or culturally or religiously, maybe you don't feel as comfortable with that, then you have to decide that. If you want somebody who's open, you want a friend, your sister, all of those decisions, I think, need to be made very carefully. And I know that the donor conceived community says it really needs to be fully open all the time, and I really appreciate that, and I think in many circumstances that's true, but it's not right for everyone. Everyone's situation is different, and you really need to think about what's right for your
And the time to think about that is at the beginning of as part of the initial steps that you're taking to find your donor. Once you've found your donor and you've created embryo, it is so hard to go back and think about these things. And I've had patients say, I can't believe I made this mistake. I never thought about the difference between known and open. And I wish I had known that up front. So I'm glad that this is part of your process. And I'll be sure to share this with all my patients too. I love this.
It is so important, and for people, as you know, particularly heterosexual women who are using an egg donor, it's particularly difficult, and I certainly appreciate that it's painful to kind of think about your future with your child and with this donor when you have infertility problems yourself and you wish that you could use your genetics and you're still feeling that searing pain, and now you have to start thinking about an open donor. It can be really, really difficult, but I encourage people to have some counseling around it and remind them that even though they've been on this really fast treadmill to try to get pregnant, they can take a breath now because if they wait another 6 months or even a year, it doesn't matter. They're using egg donor. So they're not in the same rush that they were in before. So if they can have some counseling around it to try and think about what's my life going to look like in years from now? And am I going to want to share information with my child? Am I going to want to ask the donor for medical information? I'll share a very quick story. My daughter, who was adopted at birth, didn't have her first tooth until she was about 2 years old. And she's older now, and so years ago, the medicine was not what it is today, and the doctor was really worried about it. He said, "I don't know what's going on with her. We've tried everything. You know, we really need to get her X-rays." She got the X-rays. They said her teeth look impacted, but we don't know what's going on. We might have to do some exploratory surgery. And I called her birth mom on the phone, and I said, "Can you just tell me when you got your teeth?" And she said, "Oh, it wasn't until after I was 2 years old." Well, that was the end of the story, right? So that's a very simple and seemingly insignificant thing. I've seen so many people who have serious illnesses, right? Donors who are otherwise healthy and then develop breast cancer at 35 or have some other medical issue in their family. So there's a lot of benefits, not just having a relationship with your donor, but there's medical benefits and social benefits and so many benefits. So long story short, I do think it's worthwhile taking some time to take a breath, think about, does this make sense for me? Is this something that I want for my future child? Am I going to want it later? Because as you said, people do regret that. So I think that's important. And then the last thing is everything else is gravy. After all of these issues have been satisfied, if you want that Italian donor or the person with curly hair, or your grandmother loves her Irish lineage and she would be so happy to have an Irish baby, fine. But I think thinking about these other things, the things over which you have some control first, are really vital to choosing the right donor, not just for now, but for your future child.
Yeah, these steps are great. Thank you for developing this 5-step process for patients so that when they choose a donor, they're as well informed as possible. Lisa, what do primary care doctors and OBGYNs need to know about supporting patients through a fertility journey?
It's really important for the medical community in general to understand the issues around these reproductive procedures, right? What it means to have a surrogate, what it means for the parents, what it means to have an egg donor, the impact of the not having those genetic pieces that you might want to have when you're putting together this medical puzzle. I think it's really important, and there is some work being done within the mental health community to try to help people understand that and to try to change some of those things in medical records and for doctors in general.
Great. Lisa, thank you for such an insightful conversation today.
Well, thank you so much for what you do. And I just want to say you are such an inspiration to so many people and have been for so long. I really don't know how you did it. I know before the show started, you were talking about your energy level, which is remarkable. But I will say it's not just good for you to keep you going, it's good for all of us who are recipients of this great information that you share. So thank you for everything that you do. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me on today.
I'd love for you to plug your book, your membership, your website. Where can people find you and your book?
You can find me on social media, on Instagram at the Center for Family Building, TikTok, all the social medias, on YouTube, my podcast, and that's called Building Your Family. My book is called Building Your Family, The Complete Guide to Donor Conception. And the new platform is called Building Your Family. So we have one name and try to help everyone on this journey.
Yeah. And tell us about this membership that you just now launched.
We want to help patients, right? And this is what we're here for. This is what makes us happy. And I have done so many things. I've had my podcast and my book and my research. And through all of this, I thought, wouldn't it be so nice to put it all together in one place where someone can access all of it for less than $1 a day? They could join a community. They can get lots of support. They can have educational resources. They could have video programs. They can have information from my book. They could have information from my lectures. And I put it all together in one resource. And so they can go on the platform, stay there as long as they want, connect with the community, get lots of informational content and recorded videos, downloadable resources, and lots of things all in one place. And I really am so proud of it.
That's so exciting. Is it already launched?
It's already launched and we already have members very happy, which I'm thrilled to see. And I'd love to have more people come on and tell me what they think, because I want to just keep improving it and help as many people as I can.
We'll definitely include the link to the membership in the show notes, but can you just share the link with us for those that are listening right now?
Yes, so everyone who's interested can take a look at my website, familybuilding.net, and you'll see a button for membership. You can go on there and read all about it and see what's included. And I'm really, really confident that you will love it so much that if in the first week you don't love it and you don't feel like you get a lot out of it, you can cancel, no questions asked. I really feel like it will be a huge resource.
That's great. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add today?
And I just want to say thank you to everybody out there for listening. And I want you to feel safe knowing that you have all of us behind you. We're all working very hard to support you. And no matter what the outside world looks like, we have your back and you're not alone.
And I say, I have your uterus and you're not alone. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.